Is a leaf's only purpose to fall?
Well, Yasuo, for your case, I sure hope not. Yasuo, the Unforgiven. The lone wanderer in search of the truth, hoping to cleanse his name. He's also known as the guy that just doesn't die. Like seriously, what even is this shit? Such power, elegance, swiftness, and other synonyms can only come from a calm and disciplined mind, right? Not necessarily. This man has gone through so much pain and turmoil that I cannot feasibly understand how he is still moving through the days, especially when the events of his lore shows us that Yasuo, in his current living conditions, is at risk for developing depression. Before I go any further, let's ask the question, what is depression? And if you answer that with feeling really sad, then you have a severely limited knowledge of the illness. But that's okay, that's why you're here. Yes, feeling really sad is one of the most well-known facets of depression, but this rabbit hole goes deeper, my people. First of all, there are multiple types of depression: bipolar depression, postpartum depression, seasonal affective disorder, major depressive disorder, and more. But for this video, we're going to talk about this one. Major depressive disorder is often referred to as clinical depression and is the most common form of depression experienced in the United States. In 2015 alone, an estimated 16.1 million adults, 18 or older, had at least one major depressive episode. 16 million. That is 6.7% of all adults in the United States. I know where you're thinking. The United States isn't very comparable to Runeterra, let alone Ionia. But I'm mentioning these statistics to give you an idea about how prevalent depression is. Depression also has way more symptoms than just feeling sad. There's daily fatigue, overwhelming fears of worthlessness or guilt, impaired concentration, daily insomnia or hypersomnia, diminished interest in pleasure, significant weight loss or gain, and probably the most severe, recurring thoughts of death or suicide. These symptoms can last for months, sometimes years at a time, and significantly impair the lives of those who suffer from them. Now on the surface, Yasuo may not exhibit any symptoms of depression, but examining his backstory reveals a much bigger picture. The events that have unfolded throughout Yasuo's life leave him in a very vulnerable position. When it comes to preventing mental illnesses, there is this term known as risk factors, which are any attributes, characteristics, or exposure of an individual that increases the likelihood of developing a disease or an injury. In short, it means anything that makes a person more likely to get a certain illness. Therefore, determining the risk factors of an illness helps to hopefully prevent someone from developing said illness. For example, a risk factor for lung cancer is smoking. Thus, eliminate the risk factor of smoking and you protect the person from developing lung cancer. It's never really that straightforward because one illness could have multiple risk factors you gotta watch out for. But the main point is that identifying the risk factors is one of the most important steps to preventing an illness. Unfortunately, Yasuo's lore reveals 3 major risk factors that can lead this Rurouni down the dark, despair-ridden path of depression. So let's review Yasuo's lore and identify these risk factors along the way. Yasuo was a brilliant pupil at a renowned Ionian sword school. A genius with the blade, he was the only student in a generation to master the legendary wind technique. Many believed he was destined to become a great hero, including his brother, Yon. But unlike the others from the school, Yon understood his brother's flaw. When I watched my young brother Yasuo begin training, he breathed life into the blade at first touch. One heard whispers in the halls comparing him to the sword masters of old. But as he grew and his skills increased, so did his ego. He was impetuous and boastful. He ignored our master's lessons and knew nothing of patience. Being the compassionate elder brother he was, Yon offered his guidance to try to teach his younger brother patience so that he could truly be the hero everyone envisioned. However, his fate was changed forever when Noxus invaded. Yasuo was to guard an Ionian elder, but he foolishly believed his blade alone could make the difference. Therefore, he left his post to join the fight. By the time he returned, the elder had been slain. Racked with guilt, Yasuo willingly turned himself in, ready to face the consequences of his actions. However, Yasuo was the one accused of the murder. At that moment, Yasuo made one of the hardest decisions in his life. He knew if he didn't act, the true murderer would go unpunished. Thus, he rose his sword against his allies, his school, his home, and made his escape. Now an enemy of Ionia, he searches for the true murderer, completely isolated from not only the people he knew, but the rest of his country as well. Social isolation. A state of complete or nearly complete lack of contact between an individual and society. The first risk factor within Yasuo's life. Humans are social creatures. We depend on each other for survival, whether it's physically or emotionally. Say what you will about making it on your own, but I'm sure someone wiped your ass when you were a baby. Sticking together is how we survived on this planet. So taking away that collective community from someone is literally limiting their chances for survival. Although there are people who are completely capable of physically surviving on their own, such as being able to earn money, getting food to eat, maintaining shelter, doing laundry, etc., the science shows that social isolation is toxic to the mind. Researchers at the University of Hong Kong conducted a secondary data analysis on American population-based data gathered from 2004 to 2005. The adults in the population they looked at were aged 18 and older. What they found was over 33,000 of these Americans lacked contact with any close friends that they could possibly have. The same analysis also determined that social isolation, defined as a lack of close friends within this study, was associated with an increased risk for dysthymic disorder, social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, and major depressive disorder. And that's just lacking contact with friends. Can you imagine the risk someone would be in when they are completely isolated from their family or even their country? As cool and edgy as it may seem to some people, the evidence shows that socially isolated people are at a higher risk for mental illness. Okay, one down, two more to go. Yasuo spent the next several years wandering the land, seeking any clue that might lead him to the murderer. All the while, he was relentlessly hunted by his former allies. The first was a swordsman of strength renowned throughout Ionia. When we were young, I saw him cleave a tree in two with a single swing of his blade. But he could not cleave the wind. The second was a warrior of speed and grace. Agile and cunning, she outran the clever foxes in the woods. But she could not outrun the wind. The third was a man of compassion. He taught me the meaning of patience when I was just a prideful child. My guide, my friend, my brother. Living life day by day, having to worry about whether or not it would be your last. Endlessly hunted by anyone looking for either vengeance or reward money. That is a life filled with stress. It's called chronic stress. Stress is a negative emotional experience accompanied by predictable biochemical, physiological, cognitive, and behavioral changes that are directed either toward altering the stressful event or accommodating to its effects. Chronic stress is persistent or long-lasting stress. Chronic stress can have negative impacts on the physiology of a person. The earliest response to stress comes from the arousal of the sympathetic nervous system, a chain of hormonal reactions that result in the general responses you get from stress, such as increased heart rate, sweating, constriction of blood vessels, increased breathing. You get the idea. People can recover from this with the help of its counter system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which brings the body back to its pre-stress condition. Under chronic stress, the body is constantly exposed to these conditions, which can lead to dysregulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is really important for the body. For example, it's involved with the restorative aspect of sleep, so disturbed parasympathetic function leads to disturbed sleep or even insomnia. And trust me, sleep is something you really come to value the older you get. The dysregulation also results in neurological issues. There's an increase in cortisol levels, otherwise known as the stress hormone, but there's also a decrease in dopamine levels, the neurotransmitter mostly known for its reward effect. Decreased dopamine levels is linked to the development of depression. So having to constantly fight and outrun the people after him is not only putting a heavy strain on Yasuo's body, but also leaves him susceptible to depression on a neurological level. So social isolation and chronic stress. Let's move on to the last one. Bound by a common code of honor, the two warriors bowed and drew their swords. Silently, they circled one another under the moonlight. When they finally charged forward, Yon was no match for Yasuo. With a single flash of steel, he cut his brother down. Yasuo dropped his weapon and rushed to Yon's side. Overcome with emotion, he demanded to know how his own kin could think him guilty. Yon spoke.
The Elder was killed by a wind technique. Who else could it be, Yasuo?
Yasuo suddenly realized why he had been accused. He professed his innocence once more and begged his brother's forgiveness. Tears streamed down Yasuo's face as his brother passed in his arms. Death, the final risk factor. I don't think this one needs much explaining. Death of a loved one can bring about heavy, painful emotions. It's common to grieve over the death of a loved one. This person had such an important influence in your life and is now gone. No longer there for support, for guidance, for love. It's normal to feel an overwhelming sadness, and is essential to be able to move on with life. I'm not saying Yasuo's grief over the death of his brother is outright depression, but under the circumstances he is living with, this major event in his life is dangerous for his mental health. His brother has been a major source of support for him all of his life, acting as his guide, making sure Yasuo realizes his full potential. And now he's gone. Gone by Yasuo's very own hands. It's tragic. With being socially isolated from his country, enduring the chronic stress of being hunted down each day, and the death of his beloved brother, one can't help but wonder how Yasuo can keep on wandering Ionia. I understand the search to prove his innocence is what motivates him, but even then people have limits. Limits that even Yasuo himself is starting to acknowledge.
How long can I keep going? Even the strongest wind eventually dies.
So with all of these risk factors, why is it that Yasuo continues to have such a strong resolve? Well, Yasuo wasn't entirely socially isolated. Okay, now listen, I didn't lie to you guys earlier about him being socially isolated from his country. That part is true. But Yasuo did meet one person who wasn't out to kill him. One person that decided to stay with him for some time. And that person was Taliyah. Yasuo came across Taliyah when she accidentally dropped an avalanche of snow on him. I know how it sounds, but I promise you, Taliyah is his support system. After saving his life, the two had a sort of heart-to-heart in a cave. Yasuo recognized Taliyah as also a lost wanderer with a troubled past, involving her power. I'm guessing he could relate to her since he too had great power that needed to be controlled, albeit more through patience. As a result, Yasuo became her teacher. Being a wandering Shuriman, Taliyah had no idea about Yasuo's criminal charges, which works out well for Yasuo. I mean, finally, someone isn't trying to kill him. Just having someone around is enough for Yasuo to experience some sort of relief from his isolation. He's no longer alone, and is doing something that he most likely believes is worthwhile, being a mentor, the same way his brother was a mentor to him. There's hope for Yasuo within this relationship, whether he realized he needed it or not. But then Taliyah figured it out. Soldiers entered the inn Yasuo and Taliyah were resting in after a long day of training. That was when Taliyah learned that Yasuo was a wanted man throughout all of Ionia.
So this is where you've been hiding. Savor that drink. It'll be your last. This man, Yasuo, is guilty of assassinating a village elder. His crime warrants the punishment of death, to be carried out on sight.
Kill me? You can try. After a fight broke out, Yasuo and Taliyah made their escape together. But Taliyah now knew the truth. Her teacher is known as a murderer throughout all of Ionia. With this fact being the only thing she knows about her teacher, what does she think of him now?
They knew you, Yasuo.
We need to keep moving.
They wanted you dead.
There are a lot of people who want me dead, and now some will want you dead as well. If it matters, they named a crime I did not commit.
I know.
Excuse me, what? Someone actually believes Yasuo is innocent? She may not understand, but her faith in Yasuo is something that he desperately needed. He finally has one person that believes in his innocence, and that fact alone brings comfort. We all know Yasuo is the reserved, stoic type, but I'm sure even he knows deep down that Taliyah has become his support, and we can tell by his reaction when Taliyah says she has to leave for Shurima.
Where are you going? Shurima is to the west.
My place is not in Shurima, and neither is yours. Not yet.
You heard the merchants. The lost city has risen.
Tales to scare the tradesmen and drive up the price of Shuriman linen.
And if a living god walks the sands, you don't know what that means. He will reclaim what he has lost. The people who once served him, the tribes. He will enslave my family. I must protect them. Don't you understand that?
Protect? Does your great weaver not watch over them? Your training is unfinished. You risk your life returning to them.
They are worth my life.
You can see here that Yasuo is being a bit defensive at the thought of Taliyah going to Shurima. Sure, he makes it about her unfinished training, but think about it. Yasuo is the one in charge of her training. If she stays to continue her training, she stays with Yasuo. If she leaves, Yasuo loses the only form of support he's had in a long time. Unfortunately, Taliyah does decide she has to leave.
You could come with me.
I have heard the desert meat is quite good. But I'm not finished in Ionia.
Taliyah studied him carefully, and then reached inside her tunic. Breaking a long, loose thread, she offered the length of the hand-spun wool to him. He looked at it suspiciously.
It's a tradition of thanks among my people. To give a piece of yourself is to be remembered.
You will move quickly with the mountains beneath you. Use your power. Creation, destruction. Embrace it. All of it. Your wings have carried you far. They may even carry you home. I trust that you will weave the right balance. Safe journey, little sparrow.
And just like that, Yasuo lost the only support system he had. But it was important that Yasuo experienced that comfort from someone. With the isolation and the chronic stress built up, who knows how long Yasuo could have lasted wandering alone. But I'm sure the experience has given him a recharge of sorts, a break that he desperately needed. Maybe that's why he's able to continue moving forward. Sometimes, you have no idea about the kind of influence you can have on another's life.